We'll now continue with Ms. Atwin. Ms. Atwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The cruel impact of systemic racism is not only felt through law enforcement. Research, data, and lived experiences have made it unequivocal. Racial discrimination impacts immensely the health of racialized and Indigenous peoples. In some cases, it's an issue of life or death. Moreover, the intersection of gender and racism amplifies the consequences. For instance, the documented practice of forced sterilization of Indigenous women, undiagnosed endometriosis, in which symptoms are dismissed or ignored for years, far more often for women of color, the persistence of transphobia, and how the hospital is caring for our 2S LGBTQ+ community. The government made a commitment last fall to work to support studies that take diversity, race, and gender factors into account to improve women's health care. My question is to the Minister of Health. When will we see action on this commitment in an effort to eliminate racism and systemic barriers in the healthcare system?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, I appreciate the question and the importance of this conversation. This is work that our government started doing when we were elected in 2015, and we will continue to build upon that work. I agree with the member that there is more work to do, and that's exactly why I'm working with all departments, all agencies to make sure this work is happening. It's not just about public safety, it's also about health. It's also about equality and equity. It's about making better decisions informed by lived experiences. I can promise you we are not only listening, we are engaging, and we're committed to actions and outcomes. This government, with everyone's help, will get it done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Atwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fredericton is a riding crossed by a river. On an official map, I will read that its name is the St. John. But for the Wolastoqiyik people, its name is Wolastoq, meaning the beautiful and bountiful river. And it is indeed beautiful. For centuries, the river has been a source of friendship, trade, and identity. We are witnessing here and around the world a movement to reclaim spaces. Colonial stories have been imposed on mountains, statues, streets, and rivers across Canada in an effort to erase and rewrite. If we want a culture to not only survive, but thrive, it must be an integral part of our environment. Indigenous names of spaces are a powerful way to inscribe the landscape with meaning and show reverence. My question is to the Heritage Minister. By working with First Nations communities and respecting their jurisdiction and priorities, will his government lead initiatives to create public policies in recognition of Indigenous place names?
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My apologies, technical difficulties. I thank the member opposite for her question and for advocacy in this matter. As she well known, we have in the last mandate adopted a new bill, the Indigenous Language Bill, to help save, promote, and foster Indigenous languages and the revitalization of those languages. We are doing so in partnership with Indigenous communities across the country, and we will continue to do so, Mr. President. Thank you.
Ms. Atwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are approximately 6 million people living with a disability in Canada. Before the pandemic, they were already struggling with inclusion, accessibility, and poverty, and those are issues that have only been exacerbated. This government prides itself on growing the middle class, but we must not forget that the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. Can the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development, and Disability Inclusion share exactly how the government plans to support people living with a disability in the following months?
Well, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very important question. We are all mindful of the additional and significant barriers that people living with disabilities have to fight and to live with in the particular circumstances. And that's why we announced just a few days ago that we would be sending up to $600 of additional assistance to people living with disabilities. Unfortunately, we didn't obtain the opportunity of a debate on that last week. We
go back to Ms. Atwin. Ms. Atwin.
Supporting people with disabilities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will there be a new bill tabled in the near future that people can count on?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians and all members of this House can count on the clear dedication and commitment of this government to support people with disabilities. We're going to look at all possible.
To Ms. Atwin. Ms. Atwin.
For my last remaining time, I'd just like to wish everyone a happy Father's Day. To my father, Bob, to my husband, Chris, and my stepfather, Ronnie, thank you for all that you do. Bonne fête des pères. Thank you.